Now, KEFINE is a brand that everybody knows and has been making waves recently with, although not an extreme amount of products, but every time they come up with something, people will definitely find it very interesting and have very good responses to it. And one of those back then was the KEFINE Klean. Well, today it's not going to be on that, but basically a revisit on that product, which is the KEFINE Klean SV. Now, this in the most simplest way possible, I put it as the polar opposite of the OG Clean because the OG Clean is something that is more V-shaped, it is more fun, it is more dynamic, more musical, maybe a little bit on the warmish side. And then you have something like the Clean SV, which is more of a neutral balance, a more legitimately neutral tone, and having a more clinical and clean response. Now, with that said though, I like the fact that for the price bracket, which is 56 US dollars, they are gonna be aiming at a very nice hole in the market because not really that much IEMs with a neutral balance tuning of this caliber exists here. And this one specifically has a little bit more of an emphasis on the upper mids and up, so definitely you'll be getting a little bit more of a brighter experience. Now, starting off the bass, as I said, this is neutral balance, so definitely not for bass heads, but with a more leanish approach, definitely expect things to just sound adequate, but not extremely much. But despite that, I like the fact that sub bass is presented in a more airy way. And lower mid bass overall has better clarity, mainly because of its more leanish texture, as well as having a little bit more of a cold-ish type of presentation. And note definition and resolution is definitely again on the Clean SV's strong suit, mainly because you have more room to show its intention rather than having something that's a little bit more boomy, that's a little bit more rounded. Rather, this thing is more in a high def state for the bass side. Vocals, I would say, is more on the slightly forward side, but it also has a very good distance between you and the vocalist so that you don't feel like it's a little bit too intimate. Tonality and timbre, I would say, is quite neutral and transparent, but definitely it's a little bit inaccurate on the upper ends, but only very slightly, which I'll touch about it later. And one thing to take note is that specifically only for vocals in a higher octave, there will definitely be some slight thinness, but not to the point where you can always notice it. It's only there if, let's say, we're on nitpicking levels of focus. And definitely female vocals will definitely sound brighter, and sometimes, just sometimes, they might be a little bit shrill. But male vocals, in my opinion, I feel like they balance it very out in terms of its note weight, which, to be honest, is not extremely much, it's just enough, but at the same time, it gives a good amount of energy. So with what you don't have with body, you're going to be exchanging with energy. Now going on to the mid-range, which specifically I'll cover on instruments, I like the fact that despite this being a single DD, it honestly is quite performing in its own right. Mainly not only with its transparency, it also gives a very good amount of clarity and even slightly just saturates every single instrument so it has a more richer feeling to it. And for anything that is at the lower mid-range, it will complement quite well as it is nearing towards the bass region. It just coheres very well and gives you a more dimensional piece, working and resonating with the frequencies below it as well as above it. And personally, after listening to this with quite a number of songs that I usually test, I like the fact for acoustic sets, specifically anything with strings present, it will sound extremely realistic and extremely full. You can hear guitar strums, you can hear guitar picking, every single little nuances of the micro details part, let's say something like a pick hitting the strings, or maybe just a very simple strum where your fingernail grazes through the strings. Everything can be enunciated extremely well. Best example that I could give you is Vincent Bellinger's song where you can hear the cellos, the strings, literally having some very slight vibratos here and there, which is extremely clinical, but not to the point where it's a little bit too much. I feel like they've done a very good job in terms of balancing this so that it sounds very detailed, but not extremely detailed to the point it sounds boring. Going on to the upper mids and treble, only way I can say this is that the KEFINE Klean really gives off a bright response with surgical precision of emphasis. When I say that, imagine something that is extremely pinpoint accurate in terms of imaging and separation, and that specific treble note just hits like that. Like there's no bluntiness to it, it's just extremely surgically accurate. Timbre is also of a very clean nature with no signs of tinniness, no signs of metallicness, but definitely again it might get slightly bright for some, so take note of that. And also another thing to take note is that treble extension on this one is not extremely extended. Like in fact, it is the exact opposite. Everything has a very fast decay. So occasionally you might feel this thing is a little bit dry. But with the very quick ending of an extension, it makes everything sounds more clean, more clear. And instruments in this range is also quite frank and realistic, given what it intends with no coloration. But with some very weird caveats that I mentioned just now with the vocals, any single vocal that hits the upper mids range will definitely have a very weird tonality that I just cannot pinpoint. Like it's not 100% weird, but it just sounds somewhat inaccurate ever so slightly. But nevertheless, not really that big of a deal. This is just some very nitpick levels of noticing. Now going on to technical highlights, I feel like a few things should definitely be said. This is a pair that sounds good out of the box, but after burning it will probably sound even better. Because I do notice initially there is some very slight pockets missing in terms of the range between the mid-range and the upper mids. So having a very proper burn-in will definitely smoothen out that particular part so that everything sounds more cohesive. Staging on this set is, in my opinion, quite good because personally, I just finished listening to the Tin Hi-Fi T6. That thing is great. This has more or less the same level of width and height as that. So, for 56 bucks, you can rival something that is around that price. In terms of imaging and separation, this one I noticed changes a lot in terms of what you're trying to use your source. So when I'm using something like my Kensei, then this thing will definitely pump everything up to the max. So every single imaging separation will be done in a very amazing manner. If I'm using something a little bit more common like my Hibby R6 III, then that might be a little bit more, normal. And in terms of detail retrieval, I think the best way for me to describe is that it keeps unconsciously lets me forget that this thing is not 120 US dollars, but only half the price of that. So take that as you will. But basically, micro details, macro details are also extremely good. They provide you with very clear and crisp and clean intention, just throwing themselves out, but not extremely much. Because again, this is a neutral balance set. So every single thing has a very equal say throughout the track. With that, everything performs very evenly, very equally. Okay, just a few more things before we wrap things up. Let's talk about the nozzles. Now, I've reviewed this entire video with the context of using a silver nozzle, which is the most balanced one out there. Should you say, like I mentioned, the uppers are a little bit dry, you want a little bit more airy presence, a little bit more extension, then y'all could go with the gold nozzle. This one definitely improves in terms of the airy emphasis in the upper mid range. And if, let's say, you want something that's a little bit more intimate, y'all could go with this, which is the black filter nozzle. Now, this one right here, I feel like the only significant difference that I get here is the fact that it pushes the vocal ranges only a little bit slightly forward, which gives it a little bit more of an intimacy feeling. Now, the Clean SV, in my most simplest way of interpreting it, is the fact that this is kind of like the evolution of audiophiles' tastes. Because I can't really speak for everybody, to be frank, but for me and my friends at least, we started off with things that are quite V-shaped. We started off with things that are so-called very fun. And the longer that you are within this audiophile scene, you tend to kind of notice a lot of those high-end sets are either mild V shapes or balanced or neutral. So with that said, I think this is more of a matured approach by KEFINE because all in all, I still enjoy the set a lot. And if let's say we're listening to jazz, we're listening to soul, pop, rock, anything that's like city pop, anything that's like the Beatles, George Benson, yeah, instruments will definitely give you a good ride. And specifically for live sets like NPR, yeah, having anything in the upper mid range will definitely give you a very good run for your money because it sounds extremely realistic. It gives you that again that surgical precision of bright hits that just keeps you extremely engaged and just giving you a good time. So once again, thank you for watching. I want to thank Colin for sending these my way for an honest evaluation, and for anybody that's interested, y'all could just look at the product links all down below. It's unaffiliated. Sorry if the video is a little bit more rushed, but again, I have a lot of things to do. But one more stupid thing I want to do is that with this mic, I can technically do a lot of different things. I can go out and do videos, which might be something that will be done in the future. So stay tuned. What was I going to say? I don't care. Have a great day.